The transport ship Meridian's Edge shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of dimensional transition. Captain Elena Vasquez felt the familiar weight settle back into her bones as artificial gravity reasserted itself. Around her, the bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency, their fingers dancing across holographic displays that painted the darkness in blues and greens. "Navigation, report," Elena commanded, her voice cutting through the gentle hum of shipboard systems. Lieutenant Commander James Park looked up from his station, his dark eyes reflecting the star charts floating before him. "We're in the Kepler 442 system, Captain. Right where we're supposed to be." Elena nodded, but something felt wrong. The silence from the communications array bothered her more than she cared to admit. For 3 months, they had been receiving signals from this system. Not random cosmic noise or pulsar emissions, but deliberate, structured transmissions that spoke of intelligence. The patterns were complex, mathematical, beautiful in their precision. Humanity's first confirmed contact with alien intelligence. Now nothing. Communications, anything on the arrays? Ensign Maria Santos shook her head, her fingers still working across her console. "Dead silence, Captain. The same frequencies that were broadcasting for months are completely quiet." The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the system in all its glory. Kepler 442b hung before them like a green and blue jewel, its surface swirled with white clouds. 2 moons orbited the planet, their surfaces scarred by ancient impacts. Further out, gas giants drifted in lazy orbits, their rings catching and scattering starlight. It was beautiful. It was also completely silent. "Sensors, full sweep," Elena ordered. "I want to know everything about this system." Chief Science Officer Dr. Sarah Chen looked up from her instruments, her expression troubled. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. Whatever civilization was here, they were advanced. Very advanced." Elena moved to stand behind Chen's station, studying the readouts. "Define word, Doctor." "The energy signatures are residual, fading, like echoes of something that used to be there." Chen highlighted several points on the display. "I'm detecting artificial structures in orbit around the planet, but they're not responding to our hails. No power signatures, no movement, no signs of active technology." The bridge fell quiet except for the soft beeping of instruments. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature controls. They had come here expecting to make history, to be humanity's first ambassadors to an alien species. Instead, they were arriving at what appeared to be a graveyard. "Take us into the system," Elena ordered. "Standard approach pattern. Keep all sensors active and maintain yellow alert status." The Meridian's Edge began its journey toward the inner system, its fusion drives painting brief stars against the cosmic darkness. Elena had commanded this ship for 7 years, had taken her crew to the edges of known space, and brought them home safely every time. But she had never felt the weight of responsibility as heavily as she did now. This mission was different. The discovery of the signals from Kepler 442b had changed everything for humanity. After centuries of searching, they had finally found proof that they were not alone. The signals had been decoded partially, revealing mathematical concepts, star charts, and what appeared to be artistic expressions. The transmissions suggested a species that was not only intelligent, but creative, curious about the universe around them. The journey to Kepler 442b had taken 2 years, even with humanity's most advanced faster-than-light drive. Every day of that journey, the signals had continued, growing stronger as they approached. The communications teams had worked tirelessly to decode more of the transmissions, learning what they could about the alien civilization. They had learned that the beings called themselves something that roughly translated to weavers of light. They appeared to communicate through a combination of mathematical equations and harmonic frequencies. Their art, from what humanity could understand, seemed to involve manipulating electromagnetic fields to create 3-dimensional sculptures of pure energy. More importantly, the aliens seemed peaceful. Their transmissions contained no weapon signatures, no signs of aggressive intent. Instead, they broadcast what appeared to be their history, their science, their culture. It was as if they were deliberately sharing themselves with whoever might be listening. Now, as the Meridian's Edge approached their world, That voice had fallen silent. "Captain," Park called from the navigation station. "I'm detecting debris fields around several of the orbital structures. Metal fragments, some of them quite large." Elena felt her stomach drop. "Weapons fire?" "Unknown, Captain. The distribution pattern is strange. It's not random debris from an explosion or battle. It's more like the structures were deliberately dismantled." Dr. Chen looked up from her station, her face pale. "Captain, I'm reading something else. The planet's electromagnetic field is fluctuating in patterns. Very specific patterns." Elena moved to Chen's station. "Explain." "The field variations match some of the mathematical sequences we detected in the original transmissions. It's as if the planet itself is trying to communicate." The main view screen zoomed in on Kepler 442b as they drew closer. The planet was beautiful, its continents green with what appeared to be vegetation, its oceans a deep blue-green that spoke of alien biochemistries. Cities were visible from orbit, their lights forming complex geometric patterns across the night side of the world. But the cities were dark. No lights moved between them. No ships lifted from spaceports or descended from orbit. "Life signs?" Elena asked quietly. Chen was quiet for a long moment, her instruments probing the planet below. "I'm detecting massive biological activity, Captain. The ecosystems appear to be thriving. But I'm not reading any complex electromagnetic signatures that would suggest technological civilization." "What about the cities?" "They're there, but they're empty. No power signatures, no movement, no signs of active habitation." Elena stood in the center of the bridge, watching the alien world rotate slowly on the screen. Somewhere in the last 3 months, between the time the Meridian's edge had left Earth and now, an entire civilization had vanished. Not destroyed. Chen would have detected signs of warfare or catastrophe. Simply gone. "Captain," Santos called from communications. "I'm picking up something. Very faint, but it's definitely artificial." Elena spun toward her station. "The original signal patterns?" "No, ma'am. This is different. It's coming from the planet's surface, from one of the larger cities. It's not a communication signal, though. It's more like a beacon. Can you localize it?" "Yes, ma'am. Northern continent. What appears to be the largest urban center. The signal is coming from a structure near the city center." Elena looked around her bridge. Her crew was good, the best humanity had to offer. They had volunteered for this mission knowing they might not come home, knowing they were venturing into the complete unknown. Now that unknown had become something far stranger than anyone had anticipated. "All right, people, we're going down there." Mr. Park, plot a descent trajectory to the source of that beacon. "Dr. Chen, I want a full atmospheric analysis." "Santos, keep monitoring that signal. If it changes in any way, I want to know immediately." "Captain," Chen said quietly, "are you sure that's wise? We don't know what happened to the beings that built this civilization. Going to the surface could be dangerous." Elena looked at the planet turning slowly below them. Somewhere down there were the answers to questions humanity had been asking for millennia. Who else shared the universe with them? What were they like? What had they learned in their journey among the stars? And now, perhaps most importantly, where had they gone? "Doctor, 3 months ago this system was broadcasting to anyone who would listen. They wanted to be found, wanted to share what they knew. Now they're silent, but they left us a beacon. That suggests intention, planning." Elena paused, considering. "Whatever happened here, I don't think it was sudden or violent. I think they left us a message." The bridge crew worked in focused silence as the Meridian's edge began its descent toward the planet's atmosphere. The ship shuddered slightly as it hit the upper atmospheric layers, its heat shields glowing cherry red as they absorbed the friction of entry. Through the view screen, Elena watched the alien world grow larger. The continents were covered in what appeared to be forests, but the colors were wrong. Purples and deep blues instead of the greens of Earth. The cities grew more defined as they descended, their architecture unlike anything humanity had ever conceived. Spires twisted upward in impossible spirals, their surfaces covered in patterns that seemed to shift and flow even from orbit. "Atmosphere is compatible with human life," Chen reported. "Oxygen content is actually higher than Earth normal. Some trace gases I don't recognize, but nothing that appears toxic." "Good. Santos, any change in that beacon?" "Negative, Captain. Still broadcasting the same pattern." The ship settled into the upper atmosphere, its repulsors engaging to control their descent. Elena could see individual buildings now, could make out what appeared to be parks and gardens between the structures. Everything was perfectly preserved, as if the inhabitants had simply stepped out for a moment and would return at any time. But Elena knew they wouldn't. Whatever had happened here, the Weavers of Light were gone. "Captain," Park announced, "landing zone identified. Large open area near the beacon source. Appears to be some kind of public space. Take us down, Mr. Park." The Meridian's edge descended through clouds that sparkled with strange electrical activity, past flying creatures with wings that seemed to be made of pure light. The beacon signal grew stronger as they approached the surface, its pattern becoming more complex, more urgent. Elena felt a strange sensation as they broke through the cloud layer, and the alien city spread out below them. It wasn't fear, exactly, though the unknown certainly held its terrors. It was more like the feeling of standing at the edge of a vast ocean, knowing that beneath the surface lay mysteries beyond imagination. The ship touched down with barely a whisper, its landing struts extending to grip the alien ground. Through the view screen, Elena could see the city stretching away in all directions. The architecture was even more incredible from ground level. Buildings that seemed to grow rather than be constructed, their surfaces alive with patterns of light that moved like slow water. And everywhere, the profound silence of a civilization that had simply vanished. "Landing successful, Captain," Park reported. "All systems green." Elena nodded, but her attention was focused on the structure rising before them. It was clearly the source of the beacon signal, a spiraling tower that reached toward the sky like a frozen song. Its surface was covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as she watched, as if the building itself was trying to communicate. "Dr. Chun, Mr. Park, you're with me. Santos, you have the bridge. Maintain communications, and keep the engines warm. If something goes wrong down here, I want you ready for immediate departure." "Understood, Captain." Elena turned toward the airlock, her heart pounding with anticipation and apprehension in equal measure. In a few minutes, she would become the first human to set foot on an alien world. More than that, she would be walking into the greatest mystery humanity had ever encountered. The Weavers of Light had wanted to be found. They had broadcast their existence across the galaxy, sharing their knowledge and their art with anyone who would listen. But now they were gone, leaving behind only empty cities and a single beacon calling across the void. Whatever message they had left for humanity, whatever final gift or warning they had prepared, it was waiting in that spiral tower. Elena could only hope that when she found it, she would have the wisdom to understand it. The airlock cycled, and Elena stepped forward into the unknown. The first thing Elena noticed as she stepped onto the alien world was the silence. Not the absence of sound. Her instruments detected the whisper of wind through the strange architecture, the distant calls of aerial creatures, the gentle hum of what might have been insects. But there was no mechanical noise, no signs of technology in operation, no voices calling across the spaces between buildings. The ground beneath her feet felt solid but slightly warm, as if heated from below. The material looked like stone but had an organic quality, as if it had been grown rather than quarried and shaped. Patterns flowed across its surface in spirals and curves that seemed to follow some mathematical principle her mind couldn't quite grasp. Dr. Chun emerged from the ship behind her, her scientific instruments already active and scanning. "Fascinating," she murmured, her voice slightly distorted by the environmental suit's comm system. "The air is definitely breathable, but I'm reading energy signatures everywhere. This entire city appears to be some kind of vast technological artifact." Park joined them, his sidearm clearly visible but not drawn. He moved with the careful awareness of a security officer in unknown territory. "Captain, the beacon signal is definitely coming from that tower. But I'm also picking up smaller signals from other buildings throughout the city." Elena looked around, trying to process what she was seeing. The alien city stretched away from them in all directions, its buildings rising in impossible spirals and curves that seemed to defy gravity. Some structures appeared to be made of the same organic stone as the ground, while others seemed to be constructed from crystalline materials that caught and refracted the light of the alien sun. Gardens filled the spaces between buildings, but the plants were unlike anything from Earth. Trees with silver bark and leaves that shifted color as Elena watched, their branches forming geometric patterns that looked almost like mathematical equations. Flowers that seemed to be made of pure light, their petals glowing with soft inner radiance. The ecosystem here is incredible, Chen said, kneeling beside one of the light flowers. Captain, I think these plants are biotechnological. They're living organisms, but they're also artificial constructs. The entire city appears to be a fusion of biological and technological elements. Elena approached the beacon tower, studying its surface more closely. The symbols covering its walls definitely seemed to be some form of writing or communication system, but they moved and changed as she watched. What had been a flowing curve a moment ago might become a sharp angle, then transform into something that looked almost like a mathematical symbol she recognized. It's responding to our presence, she said. The patterns are changing more rapidly now that we're close. Park had moved to a position where he could watch both the tower and the approaches to their landing site. Captain, I hate to be the voice of paranoia, but this feels like a trap. An empty city, a beacon calling us here, patterns that respond to our presence. It's textbook alien horror scenario. Elena couldn't disagree with his assessment, but something about the atmosphere of the place felt different from the menacing unknown of popular fiction. The city didn't feel threatening. If anything, it felt sad, like a museum with no visitors, a library with no readers. I understand your concerns, Mr. Park, but look around. There are no signs of violence, no evidence of struggle. Whatever happened to the inhabitants of this city, it wasn't sudden or forced. This feels more like a preparation. Chen stood, brushing alien dust from her knees. Captain, I'm reading massive data storage systems throughout the city. Crystal matrices that could hold more information than all of Earth's computers combined. If the aliens wanted to leave us a message, they certainly had the means to do it. Elena approached the base of the tower, looking for some kind of entrance. The building seemed to be a single, continuous surface with no obvious doors or windows. But, as she drew near, a section of the wall began to shift and flow, creating an opening just large enough for a human to pass through. Definitely responding to our presence, she said. Chen, are you reading any energy spikes? Weapon signatures? Negative, Captain. The energy patterns are complex, but non-threatening. It's more like, well, like the building is trying to communicate with us. Elena looked through the opening that had appeared. Beyond was a softly lit corridor that curved upward, following the spiral of the tower. The walls were covered with the same shifting symbols, but now they seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. All right, people. We go in, but we go carefully. Park, you take point. Chun, keep scanning. If anything looks dangerous, we retreat immediately. The three humans entered the alien structure, their footsteps echoing softly in the curved corridor. The walls around them pulsed with gentle light, and Elena had the distinct impression that they were inside something alive. Not threateningly alive, but aware, responsive, intelligent. The corridor curved upward for what felt like several minutes before opening into a vast circular chamber. Elena stopped at the threshold, her breath catching at the sight before her. The chamber was enormous, its walls rising up into darkness. But it wasn't empty. Floating in the center of the space was a three-dimensional sculpture made entirely of light. It moved slowly, its form constantly shifting and changing, but always maintaining a sense of balance and purpose. It's beautiful, Chen whispered. The sculpture was beautiful, but it was also clearly more than art. As Elena watched, she began to recognize patterns in its movements. Mathematical sequences, star charts, molecular diagrams. The sculpture was telling a story, sharing information, teaching. Captain, Park said, his voice tense, we're not alone. Elena spun around, her hand moving instinctively toward her sidearm. But what she saw froze her in place. Standing around the chamber, so still she had missed them in her initial scan, were dozens of figures. They were roughly humanoid, but clearly alien, their skin seeming to be made of the same crystalline material as some of the city's buildings. They stood motionless, their faces turned toward the central sculpture, their expressions unreadable. Are they alive? Elena asked quietly. Chen was already scanning with her instruments. I'm reading minimal energy signatures. They're not dead, but they're not active either. It's like they're in some kind of suspended animation. Elena approached the nearest figure carefully. It was tall, perhaps 7 feet, with elongated limbs and a face that was both alien and somehow familiar. Its eyes were closed, but there was something about its posture that suggested peaceful rest rather than death. They're beautiful, she said, surprising herself with the comment. And they were. Despite their alien nature, there was something elegant about these beings, something that spoke of intelligence and wisdom. Their clothing, if it could be called that, seemed to be made of the same light material as the central sculpture, flowing and shifting in gentle patterns. Captain, Chun called from across the chamber, I think I understand. Look at the sculpture more closely. Elena moved to stand beside Chun, studying the constantly shifting patterns of light. Gradually, she began to see what her science officer had discovered. The sculpture wasn't random. It was telling a specific story, and that story was about the beings standing silently around the chamber. The patterns showed a civilization rising, learning, growing. They showed the development of technology that merged biology with artificial systems, the creation of art that existed in dimensions humans could barely perceive. They showed a species that had learned to manipulate matter and energy with the same ease that humans manipulated words and numbers. But then, the patterns changed, showing something else. A choice, a decision, a transformation. They evolved, Chin said quietly. Captain, I think the weavers of light evolved beyond physical existence. Elena stared at the sculpture, beginning to understand. These figures, they're not dead. They're chrysalises. Exactly. Look at the final patterns in the sculpture. It's showing transformation, transcendence. The weavers of light learned how to exist as pure energy, pure consciousness. They left their physical forms behind. Park lowered his weapon completely, his expression awed. That's why the cities are empty but preserved. They didn't die out or leave. They transformed into something else entirely. Elena felt a chill of wonder run down her spine. Humanity had come to this world expecting to meet aliens, to engage in first contact with another species. Instead, they had discovered something far more profound. Evidence of a species that had transcended the normal limitations of physical existence. But why the beacon? She asked. If they've evolved beyond the need for physical communication, why leave us a signal? The answer came from the sculpture itself. The patterns shifted, showing new images, star charts, technological blueprints, artistic expressions. But now Elena could see that these weren't random shares of knowledge. The patterns in the sculpture began to slow, to stabilize into forms that Elena's mind could more easily process. Star charts appeared, showing not just the local stellar neighborhood, but distant galaxies, mapped and explored. Technical diagrams demonstrated technologies that could manipulate matter at the quantum level, create energy from pure thought, build structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But, more than technical knowledge, the sculpture shared something else, perspective. Elena found herself understanding, through means she couldn't explain, how the weavers of light had seen the universe. Not as a hostile void to be conquered, but as a vast web of consciousness and possibility, where every star system was a neuron in a cosmic mind, every planet a thought in an infinite meditation. This is overwhelming, Chin said, her instruments barely able to process the flood of information flowing from the sculpture. Captain, this single chamber contains more scientific knowledge than humanity has accumulated in its entire history. Elena nodded, but her attention was focused on a deeper question. The weavers of light had transcended physical existence, had become something beyond her ability to fully comprehend. But they had chosen to preserve their knowledge, to leave it here for others to find. That suggested something profound about their nature, about their values. They were teachers, she said quietly. Even in transcendence, they remained teachers. The light sculpture pulsed brighter for a moment, and Elena had the distinct impression that her words had been heard and appreciated. Around the chamber, the crystalline figures of the weavers seemed to shift slightly, as if stirring in their sleep. Captain, Park said, his voice tight with concern, Are they waking up? Elena watched the figures carefully, but their movement was subtle, more like the gentle stirring of dreams than actual awakening. I don't think so, but I think they're aware of us. Chun was studying her instruments with intense concentration. The energy patterns in the chamber are shifting. It's as if the entire structure is adjusting itself to our presence, trying to communicate more effectively. Elena approached one of the chrysalis-like figures, studying its peaceful face. There was something familiar about its features, something that reminded her of the best of humanity: curiosity, wisdom, compassion. Despite the vast differences in their physical forms, she felt a kinship with these beings that transcended species. "They're not gone," she said. "They're still here, just transformed." The beacon wasn't calling us to find their ruins. It was calling us to find our teachers. The light sculpture suddenly brightened, its patterns becoming more complex, more urgent. New information flowed from it, not just technical knowledge, but wisdom. Elena found herself understanding concepts that had puzzled philosophers for millennia. The nature of consciousness, the relationship between mind and universe, the possibility of existence beyond the constraints of matter and energy. But with understanding came responsibility. The weavers of light had achieved transcendence, but they had not forgotten those who would follow their path. They had preserved their knowledge, their wisdom, their accumulated understanding of the universe as a gift for younger species who were just beginning their own journey toward enlightenment. "This is why they went silent," Elena said, the pieces finally falling into place. They weren't broadcasting randomly anymore because they knew we were coming. They were preparing this chamber, this gift, specifically for us. Chen looked up from her instruments, her face pale with the implications. "Captain, if this is true, if they've been watching us, preparing for our arrival, what does that say about our place in the universe?" Elena considered the question as she looked around the chamber. The Weavers of Light had achieved something that humanity could barely dream of, yet they had chosen to preserve their legacy for others. They had become teachers by choice, guides by design. "It says we're not alone," she said finally. "It says we're part of something larger than ourselves, part of a community of consciousness that spans the galaxy. And it says we have a lot to learn." The light sculpture pulsed one final time, its patterns settling into a steady, rhythmic flow that felt like a heartbeat. Around the chamber, the crystalline figures of the weavers seemed to settle more deeply into their transcendent sleep, but Elena no longer saw them as absent. They were present in a way that transcended physical existence, watching over their gifts of knowledge like benevolent guardians. "We need to document everything," she said, her voice filled with quiet reverence. "Every pattern, every symbol, every piece of information they've preserved. Humanity needs to know about this, needs to understand what we've been offered." Park nodded, his earlier caution replaced by wonder. "This changes everything, doesn't it? Our understanding of our place in the universe, our potential as a species." Elena smiled, feeling a sense of hope and possibility that she had never experienced before. "It does. The Weavers of Light have shown us that transcendence is possible, that consciousness can evolve beyond the limitations of physical existence. And they've given us the tools to begin that journey ourselves." As the three humans began the careful process of documenting the chamber and its contents, Elena felt a profound sense of gratitude toward the Weavers of Light. They had achieved the ultimate evolution, had become something beyond physical existence. But in their transcendence, they had not forgotten their responsibilities to those who would follow. They had become humanity's first teachers among the stars, and their lessons would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Elena spent the next 6 hours in the chamber with the transcended weavers, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what they had discovered. Dr. Chun worked methodically, her instruments recording every detail they could capture of the light sculpture and its constantly shifting patterns. Park had established a secure perimeter and maintained regular contact with the ship, though his reports grew increasingly inadequate as the scope of their discovery became clear. How do you explain transcendence to people who have never imagined it possible? The sculpture continued its patient teaching, adjusting its complexity based on their ability to comprehend. Elena found herself understanding concepts that should have taken years to master. as if the very act of witnessing the patterns imprinted knowledge directly into her consciousness. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "Captain," Chin said, looking up from her latest scan, "I'm beginning to understand how their technology works. It's not mechanical or electronic like ours. It's based on consciousness itself, on the directed application of focused thought to manipulate matter and energy." Elena nodded, though she suspected that understanding was perhaps too strong a word for what any of them were experiencing. What are the implications for humanity? Staggering. If we could learn to apply these principles, we could literally think technologies into existence. Space travel would become as simple as deciding to be somewhere else. Energy generation would be a matter of concentrating on the concept of power. Construction, medicine, agriculture, everything would be transformed. Park approached from his position near the chamber entrance. "Captain, I've been thinking about something. If the Weavers could manipulate matter with their minds, why did they need physical cities at all? Why the elaborate architecture, the technological infrastructure?" It was a good question, one that Elena had been pondering herself. The answer came from the light sculpture, its patterns shifting to show new information. Elena watched carefully, translating the visual language she was slowly beginning to understand. "They were teachers even before they transcended," she said. "The cities, the technology, all of it was designed as a learning environment. They were preparing themselves for transcendence, yes, but they were also preparing to leave lessons for others." Chen looked around the chamber with new understanding. The entire civilization was an educational system. Every building, every artifact, every piece of technology was designed to convey knowledge to future visitors. "Which means," Elena continued, "that everything we've seen here is just the beginning. If this chamber is their introductory course, imagine what else they've prepared." As if responding to her words, the light sculpture pulsed brighter and began displaying new patterns. These were different from the earlier teachings, more complex, more urgent. Elena watched carefully, her mind racing to interpret the flowing symbols and mathematical concepts. "It's showing us something new," she said. "Something about time?" The patterns crystallized into recognizable forms, star charts showing the movement of celestial bodies across vast periods, evolutionary diagrams tracking the development of species across millennia, technological progressions that spanned eons. But woven through all of it was a sense of urgency, of time running short. "Captain," Chen said, her voice tight with concern, "I think they're trying to warn us about something." Elena studied the patterns more intensely, focusing on the elements that seemed most urgent. Gradually, a picture emerged that sent chills down her spine. The Weavers of Light had transcended physical existence, but they hadn't done so in isolation. The sculpture was showing them evidence of other species, other civilizations that had faced similar evolutionary choices. Some had chosen transcendence, following the path of the Weavers. Others had chosen different routes, pure technological enhancement, genetic modification, merger with artificial intelligence. And some had chosen none of these options, remaining purely biological until external forces had made the choice for them. "They're showing us the great filter," Elena said, the implications hitting her like a physical blow. "The evolutionary bottleneck that every sapient species eventually faces." The patterns in the sculpture grew more urgent, showing scenarios that Elena recognized with growing dread. Civilizations that had destroyed themselves through warfare, others that had been consumed by their own technologies, still others that had simply stagnated and slowly declined into extinction. But interwoven with these warnings were examples of success. Species that had navigated the filter successfully, that had chosen transcendence or enhancement or synthesis, and emerged into something greater than they had been. The universe, Elena realized, was filled with graduated civilizations, each having found their own path beyond the limitations of their origins. "How much time do we have?" Park asked, reading the concern in Elena's expression. Elena studied the patterns carefully, looking for references to humanity's current developmental stage. What she found was both reassuring and terrifying. Humanity was approaching the filter, but they weren't there yet. They had time, perhaps several hundred years, to make their choice and prepare for transformation. But the window wouldn't remain open forever. "Enough time to prepare," she said finally, "but not enough to waste. The Weavers are telling us that the choice between transcendence and extinction isn't optional. Every species faces it eventually. Chen had been studying her own readings while Elena interpreted the sculpture. Captain, I'm detecting similar energy signatures from other buildings in the city. The Weavers didn't put all their knowledge in one location. They've created multiple teaching centers, each focused on different aspects of development. Elena looked around the chamber at the peaceful figures of the transcended Weavers. They had achieved something remarkable, something that represented the ultimate evolution of consciousness. But they hadn't hoarded that achievement for themselves. Instead, they had chosen to become teachers, to guide others along the same path. How many other species have been here? Elena asked the sculpture, focusing her thoughts on the question. The patterns shifted to show a parade of different beings, each clearly from a different world, a different evolutionary background. Elena saw insectoid creatures with multifaceted eyes, gaseous beings that seemed to exist as pure thought made visible, mechanical entities that had transcended their biological origins entirely. Dozens of species, perhaps hundreds, had come to this world to learn from the Weavers of Light. And humanity was not the last. The patterns showed other signals being broadcast to distant star systems, other invitations being extended to species that were approaching their own evolutionary crossroads. We're part of a network, Elena said, wonder filling her voice. A galactic educational system designed to help species navigate transcendence. Park whistled softly. And Earth has no idea any of this exists. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. What they had discovered here would change humanity forever, but only if they could successfully communicate it. How do you explain transcendent consciousness to a species that barely understood its own biology? How do you prepare an entire civilization for an evolutionary choice they didn't know they would have to make? We need to return to the ship, Elena said finally. We need to compile everything we've learned and prepare a comprehensive report for Earth. But first, we need to explore more of the city. If the Weavers have prepared multiple teaching centers, we need to understand what each one offers. Chen was already packing her equipment. Captain, I recommend we focus on practical applications first. Earth will need proof that this knowledge is real, that it works. If we can demonstrate even simple consciousness-based technologies, it will lend credibility to the larger revelations. Elena nodded, but as she turned to leave the chamber, she felt a strange reluctance. Being in the presence of the transcended Weavers had been like touching something divine, like glimpsing the ultimate potential of conscious existence. Leaving felt like stepping back into shadows after experiencing pure light. The light sculpture pulsed gently, its patterns forming what Elena somehow understood to be a farewell. But not a permanent one. The knowledge would remain here, waiting for humanity's return when they were ready for deeper learning. As they walked back through the spiraling corridor toward the exit, Elena felt the building itself responding to their passage. The walls pulsed with gentle light, as if the structure were bidding them safe travels. Outside, the alien city waited under the green-gold light of its sun, each building a repository of unimaginable knowledge. Where do we start? Park asked as they emerged into the alien daylight. Elena looked around the city, trying to prioritize the overwhelming array of options before them. The light sculpture had shown them that different buildings contained different types of knowledge, some focused on technology, others on philosophy, still others on the practical aspects of consciousness manipulation. There, she said, pointing to a cluster of smaller buildings near what appeared to be one of the city's garden areas. The sculpture indicated that those structures contain basic applications of consciousness-based technology. If we can understand and demonstrate even simple examples, it will help Earth accept the larger revelations. As they made their way through the city streets, Elena marveled at the architecture surrounding them. Every building was a work of art, its form perfectly suited to its function while maintaining aesthetic beauty that took her breath away. Gardens filled the spaces between structures, their alien plants creating living mandalas that shifted and changed as she watched. But more than the physical beauty of the place, Elena was struck by the sense of presence that permeated everything. The Weavers of Light had transcended physical existence, but their consciousness remained imprinted on every stone, every growing thing, every beam of light, that touched the city. They were gone, but they were also eternally present, eternal teachers for those who came seeking knowledge. Captain, Chun said as they approached the first of the smaller buildings, I'm reading massive information storage systems in this structure. The data density is incredible, like they compressed an entire university into a single building. The building responded to their approach just as the beacon tower had, creating an opening in its seamless wall. Beyond lay another corridor, but this one was different from the tower's spiral passage. Here, the walls were covered with three-dimensional displays that showed practical applications of consciousness-based technology. Elena watched in fascination as the displays demonstrated simple examples. A weaver using focused thought to heat water, another shaping raw materials into complex tools using only mental concentration, a group working together to lift massive objects through coordinated mental effort. It's not magic, Chin said, studying the demonstrations intently. It's applied physics at the quantum level. They learned to influence probability fields through conscious observation, to direct quantum fluctuations through focused attention. Elena felt a thrill of possibility. What the weavers were demonstrating wasn't beyond human capability. It was a development of abilities that humans already possessed in rudimentary form. Meditation practitioners spoke of the power of focused attention. Athletes described the zone where thought and action merged perfectly. Artists talked about channeling creativity from sources beyond the conscious mind. We already have the foundation, she said. Humanity already possesses the basic abilities. We just need to learn to develop and apply them. The displays continued, showing increasingly complex applications. Weavers using consciousness to communicate directly mind to mind, others manipulating their own biology to adapt to different environments, groups working together to create shared virtual realities that were indistinguishable from physical space. But, always, the demonstrations emphasized collaboration, cooperation, shared development. The weavers had not transcended as individuals, but, as a species, each member contributing their unique perspective to the collective advancement. This is what we need to take back to Earth, Elena said. Not just the knowledge that transcendence is possible, but the understanding that it requires everyone. No one ascends alone. Park was studying the tactical implications with the eye of a military strategist. Captain, these abilities would revolutionize warfare. Soldiers who could manipulate matter with their minds, communicate telepathically, adapt their biology to any environment. Elena shook her head. I don't think that's the point, Mr. Park. Look at the demonstrations carefully. Every application shown here is constructive, collaborative, peaceful. The weavers are teaching us that these abilities come with inherent ethical constraints. She was right. The more Elena studied the displays, the more she realized that consciousness-based technology seemed to require a certain mental state to function. Aggression, selfishness, destructive intent. These appeared to interfere with the very mechanisms that made the abilities possible. It's a safety feature, Chin said, understanding dawning in her voice. Species that develop these abilities can't use them for destruction because destructive mindsets prevent the abilities from working properly. Elena felt a surge of hope. The weavers hadn't just given humanity the keys to transcendence. They had given them tools that would naturally encourage peace and cooperation. A species that learned to manipulate consciousness would have to become more conscious themselves. How long do we have to study this? Park asked, ever practical. Elena looked around the building, estimating the vast amount of information it contained. Not nearly long enough. We need to prioritize ruthlessly, focus on what we can understand, and demonstrate with our current technology base. For the next several hours, the team worked systematically through the building's displays, documenting basic consciousness manipulation techniques and their underlying principles. Elena found herself able to understand concepts that should have been far beyond her training, as if proximity to the Weaver technology was enhancing her own mental abilities. By the time they returned to the ship, Elena's mind was spinning with possibilities and implications. What they had discovered would change everything for humanity. Their understanding of consciousness, their technological development, their place in the galactic community. But it would also present enormous challenges. How do you prepare an entire species for transcendence? How do you teach consciousness manipulation to billions of people? How do you ensure that humanity makes the right choices when the time comes to face the great filter? As the Meridian's edge lifted off from the alien city, Elena looked down at the Weaver civilization one final time. The empty buildings held enough knowledge to transform human understanding of reality itself. The transcended beings waiting in their crystal chambers had achieved something that represented the ultimate potential of conscious existence. And they had chosen to share it all with humanity, asking nothing in return except that humans use the knowledge wisely and pass it on to others when their own time of transcendence arrived. Elena felt the weight of that responsibility, but also the hope it represented. Humanity was not alone in the universe. They were part of a vast community of consciousness that stretched across the galaxy, each member helping others along the path toward transcendence. The question now was whether humanity would prove worthy of such trust. The journey back to Earth felt different than the voyage out. Elena stood on the bridge of the Meridian's edge watching the stars streak past as they traveled through hyperspace. But her mind kept returning to the crystal chamber and the patient figures of the transcended weavers. In the ship's data storage systems, they carried the most significant discovery in human history, but Elena wondered if they would be able to make anyone believe it. Dr. Chun had spent the weeks since leaving Kepler 442b organizing and analyzing the enormous amount of information they had collected. Her preliminary reports filled hundreds of pages, but Elena knew that even those documents barely scratched the surface of what the Weavers had shared with them. "Captain," Chin said, looking up from her workstation, "I've been thinking about how we present this to Earth. The consciousness manipulation techniques alone will sound like fantasy to most scientists. Add in transcendence and galactic educational networks, and we're going to face serious credibility challenges." Elena nodded. She had been wrestling with the same problem. "What do you recommend?" "We start small. The basic consciousness techniques, the ones that influence quantum probability fields, we can demonstrate those. I've been practicing the focusing exercises shown in the Weaver displays, and I'm actually achieving measurable results." Elena turned from the view screen. "Show me." Chun moved to a clear section of the bridge and placed a small metal sphere on the deck. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself according to the Weaver techniques they had studied. Then, with careful concentration, she focused her attention on the sphere. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the sphere began to move. Not rolling, but sliding across the smooth deck surface as if pushed by an invisible force. "It's not telekinesis in the popular sense," Chen explained, her concentration never wavering. "I'm influencing the quantum interactions between the sphere and the deck's surface, creating probability fluctuations that result in directional movement." Elena stared at the slowly moving sphere. It wasn't dramatic, certainly nothing like the abilities they had seen demonstrated in the Weaver displays, but it was undeniable proof that consciousness could directly influence physical reality. How difficult was it to learn? Surprisingly easy, once I understood the principles. The hardest part is maintaining the right mental state, focused but not forced, intentional but not aggressive. It's like meditation, but directed toward a specific outcome. Park had been watching from his station. "Dr. Chun, could this technique be scaled up? Applied to larger objects?" Chen finally let her concentration relax, and the sphere stopped moving. "Theoretically, yes. The Weaver displays showed individuals moving objects much larger than this. But it requires extensive training and the right psychological preparation. The techniques won't work if your mindset is wrong." Elena felt a spark of hope. If Chun could master basic consciousness manipulation in just a few weeks, it meant the techniques were learnable by humans. That was the first hurdle overcome. "What about the larger implications?" Elena asked. "How do we explain the transcendence concept?" Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "That's where we'll face the most resistance. The idea that consciousness can exist independently of biological substrate challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence. Most people won't be ready for that." Elena understood. She had seen the evidence firsthand, had stood in the presence of transcended beings, and she still found the concept difficult to fully accept. For people who hadn't witnessed it themselves, transcendence would sound like spiritual fantasy rather than scientific fact. "We present it as a long-term goal," she decided. We focus on the immediate benefits, consciousness-based technologies that can solve humanity's current problems, and gradually introduce the larger concepts as people become more comfortable with the fundamentals. What about the warning? Park asked. The great filter that every species faces. Elena had been thinking about that constantly since leaving the Weaver world. The urgency in the light sculpture's patterns had been unmistakable. Humanity was approaching a critical evolutionary decision point, but they weren't there yet. They had time to prepare, but only if they started immediately. We frame it as an opportunity, she said. Humanity has the chance to choose its evolutionary path, to develop beyond current limitations. But that choice requires knowledge, preparation, and unity of purpose. Chen nodded slowly. A species-wide educational program. Not just technical training, but consciousness development, ethical evolution, collaborative decision-making. Exactly. The Weavers showed us that transcendence isn't something that happens to individuals. It's something that species choose together. Elena looked around the bridge at her crew. These three people, herself, Chun, and Park, were returning to Earth with knowledge that could transform human civilization. But they were also carrying the weight of enormous responsibility. The decisions humanity made in the coming decades would determine whether their species joined the transcended civilizations of the galaxy or followed a different path entirely. Captain, the communications officer called from her station. We're receiving a transmission from Earth Command. They're requesting a preliminary report on our mission status. Elena felt her stomach tighten. How do you write a preliminary report on discovering the fundamental nature of consciousness and the evolutionary destiny of sapient species? Tell them we're returning with significant discoveries, and we'll provide a full briefing upon arrival, she said. And prepare a coded message for the Science Consortium. Tell them to assemble their best people in consciousness studies, quantum physics, and xenobiology. We're going to need all the expertise we can get. The weeks that followed were among the most challenging in Elena's career. Word of their discoveries had leaked despite security precautions, leading to wild speculation in the media about alien contact and revolutionary technologies. Religious leaders debated the spiritual implications of consciousness existing beyond biological death. Scientists demanded access to the data while government officials insisted on security reviews. But gradually, carefully, Elena and her team began sharing what they had learned. They started with small groups of researchers, demonstrating basic consciousness manipulation techniques, and sharing selected data from the Weaver displays. The response was mixed: skepticism, excitement, fear, and wonder in equal measure. Dr. Chen became the unofficial spokesperson for the Consciousness Research Program, teaching the basic techniques to volunteers while carefully documenting their progress. Within months, research centers around the world were reporting successes with quantum-level consciousness manipulation. The first major breakthrough came when a team in Geneva successfully used consciousness techniques to repair damaged molecular structures, effectively healing injuries at the cellular level. The medical implications were staggering, but more importantly, it provided undeniable proof that the Weaver knowledge was real and applicable. Elena found herself testifying before government committees, briefing world leaders, and speaking at scientific conferences. Always, she emphasized the collaborative nature of consciousness development, the need for ethical evolution alongside technological advancement. The Weavers of Light achieved transcendence because they chose to work together, she told the United Nations Special Committee on Extraordinary Phenomena. They developed consciousness techniques as a species, sharing knowledge and supporting each other's growth. Humanity faces the same choice. Not everyone was convinced. Some groups argued that consciousness manipulation was too dangerous to pursue, while others wanted to weaponize the technologies for national advantage. Elena found herself fighting battles she had never expected, defending not just the reality of their discoveries, but the ethical framework necessary to use them safely. It was Park who made the observation that changed Elena's approach to the problem. "Captain," he said during one of their strategy sessions, "we're trying to convince people with words, but the Weavers convinced us through direct experience. Maybe we need to change our methods." Elena looked at him questioningly. "The demonstration chamber," Park continued. The light sculpture that taught us directly, that showed us transcendence rather than just describing it. What if we could recreate that here on Earth? Elena felt excitement building. A human version of Weaver teaching technology. Something that could share the experience of consciousness expansion rather than just the theory. Chen was already working through the technical requirements. It's possible. The Weaver displays showed us the principles behind their teaching systems. We could build something simpler, designed for human consciousness rather than Weaver physiology. Elena made the decision that would reshape humanity's future. Do it. Build a consciousness demonstration system that can show people what we experienced on the Weaver world. Let them feel transcendence rather than just hear about it. The project took 2 years to complete, drawing on the combined expertise of consciousness researchers, quantum physicists, and engineers from around the world. The final system was installed in a purpose-built facility in Switzerland, designed to accommodate visitors from every nation and background. Elena stood in the completed demonstration chamber, watching as the first group of world leaders experienced consciousness expansion for themselves. The chamber was simpler than the Weaver original, but no less effective. Patterns of light and sound combined with carefully calibrated electromagnetic fields to induce temporary states of expanded awareness. She watched as skeptics experienced directly the reality of consciousness existing beyond biological boundaries, as scientists felt the possibility of manipulating matter through focused thought, as politicians understood viscerally the need for global cooperation in humanity's evolutionary development. It's working, Chen said quietly. Look at their faces. Elena could see the wonder and understanding dawning in the visitors' expressions. More importantly, she could see the fear dissolving, replaced by excitement about humanity's potential. When the demonstration ended, Elena addressed the group. What you've experienced is just the beginning. The Weavers of Light have shown us that consciousness can evolve beyond our current limitations, but that evolution requires choice, preparation, and unity of purpose. We have perhaps 2 centuries to prepare for our own transcendence decision. The question is, what kind of species do we choose to become? The Secretary-General of the United Nations, a woman who had entered the chamber as a skeptic, spoke for the group. How do we begin? Elena smiled, remembering her first glimpse of the Weaver city and the patient teachers waiting in their crystal chamber. We begin by choosing to grow together. We establish consciousness development programs in every nation, every community. We share the knowledge freely, support each other's progress, and work toward the day when humanity as a whole is ready to take the next step. It was ambitious, perhaps impossibly so. But, as Elena looked around the chamber at the faces of humanity's leaders, she saw something that gave her hope. The same expression of wonder and possibility that she had felt when standing before the transcended Weavers. Humanity was beginning to understand its place in the galactic community of consciousness. The real work was just beginning. But, for the first time since returning from Kepler 442b, Elena felt confident that her species would prove worthy of the trust the Weavers had placed in them. The age of human transcendence was still centuries away, but the first steps on that incredible journey had finally begun. 20 years after the first demonstration chamber opened in Switzerland, Elena stood in the gardens of the Global Consciousness Institute, watching a group of children practice basic awareness techniques. The children, no more than 10 years old, were learning to sense and influence quantum fields with a natural ease that amazed even the most experienced researchers. The world had changed dramatically since Elena's return from the Weaver homeworld. Consciousness development programs operated in every major city on Earth. Universities offered degrees in applied consciousness studies. Medical centers used consciousness-based healing techniques to treat conditions that had once been incurable. Space missions employed consciousness-enhanced navigation systems that made interstellar travel safer and more efficient. But, more importantly, humanity itself was changing. The ethical constraints inherent in consciousness manipulation had gradually shifted global culture toward cooperation and mutual support. Wars had not disappeared entirely, but they had become increasingly rare as people discovered that aggressive mindsets interfered with the very abilities that were becoming central to human advancement. Dr. Vasquez, called Maria Santos, now Director of Youth Development at the Institute, Elena had never quite gotten used to being called doctor instead of captain, though her honorary doctorate from the University of Cambridge was well earned. The morning session is ready to begin. Elena nodded, watching as the children finished their exercises and gathered in a circle. Today was special. The Institute was conducting its first attempt at group transcendence meditation with participants under the age of 12. The children had been volunteering, their parents eager to see how far human consciousness development had progressed. As Elena approached the group, she marveled at how naturally the children had adapted to consciousness techniques that many adults still struggled with. These children had been born into a world where manipulating quantum fields was as normal as using computers or driving cars. To them, consciousness expansion wasn't revolutionary. It was simply part of growing up. "Good morning, everyone," Elena said, settling onto the grass beside the circle. "Are you ready to try something new today?" A girl named Lucy raised her hand. "Ms. Elena, my mom says we might be able to touch the light thoughts today. Is that true?" Elena smiled at the child's terminology. Light thoughts was how the children described the transcendent consciousness field that surrounded and connected all living beings. Adult scientists called it the quantum consciousness matrix, but Elena preferred the children's simple, direct language. "We're going to try," Elena said. "But remember, this isn't something we can force. We have to let it happen naturally, working together as a group." The children nodded seriously, their young faces showing the kind of focused attention that most adults took years to develop. Elena looked around the circle, seeing not just individual children, but the future of human consciousness development. Maria began the session with breathing exercises, teaching the children to center themselves and align their awareness with the quantum field patterns they had learned to sense. Elena watched as their faces grew peaceful, their natural mental noise settling into the quiet focus necessary for deeper consciousness work. "Now," Maria said softly, "remember what we've practiced. Don't try to reach out with your thoughts. Let your awareness expand naturally, like ripples on a pond." Elena felt it beginning almost immediately. The children's consciousness fields started to resonate with each other, creating harmonic patterns that amplified their individual abilities. It was something the Weavers had demonstrated in their teaching displays, group consciousness work that achieved results impossible for any individual. Gradually, the children's awareness began to touch something larger. Elena could feel it too, the vast network of consciousness that connected all life, the same field that the transcended Weavers existed within. For just a moment, the boundary between individual and universal awareness began to dissolve. Lucy gasped softly. "I can see them," she whispered. "The light teachers. They're smiling." Elena's heart raced. The children were making contact with transcended consciousness, not just sensing it, but actually communicating with beings who had evolved beyond physical existence. It shouldn't have been possible, not at their age, not without decades of preparation. But there they were, 10 children sitting in a garden on Earth, having a conversation with entities that existed as pure consciousness in the quantum field that underlay all reality. The contact lasted only a few minutes before the children's awareness naturally returned to normal focus. They opened their eyes, looking around at each other with expressions of wonder and joy. "They said we're doing well," reported a boy named David. "They said humans are learning faster than they expected." "What else did they say?" Elena asked, trying to keep her voice calm despite the enormous implications of what had just occurred. "That we don't have to wait so long," Lucy said. "Humans can choose transcendence sooner than they thought because we're good at working together." Elena felt a mix of excitement and concern. The original timeline suggested humanity would face their transcendence decision in 2 or 3 centuries. If the transcended beings were indicating that humanity was progressing faster than expected, it could mean wonderful opportunities or dangerous premature advancement. After the session ended and the children returned to their families, Elena called an emergency meeting of the Institute's senior staff. Representatives joined by holographic link from consciousness research centers around the world, their faces reflecting the same mix of excitement and concern that Elena felt. "The implications are staggering," said Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Tokyo Center. "If 10-year-old children can make direct contact with transcended consciousness, it suggests human consciousness development is accelerating beyond our projections." But is that good or bad? Asked Dr. Amara Okafor from the Lagos Institute. The Weavers warned us about the dangers of premature advancement. Species that attempt transcendence without proper preparation risk psychological fragmentation or worse. Elena had been thinking about the same issues. The children seemed perfectly stable after the contact. If anything, they appeared more centered and focused than before. That's because they haven't developed the psychological barriers that adults carry, suggested Dr. James Park, Elena's former security officer who now served as director of safety protocols. Children approach consciousness expansion without fear or skepticism. Their minds are naturally more open to transcendent experiences. Maria nodded in agreement. The children in our programs consistently outperform adults in consciousness development exercises. They don't have preconceived notions about what's possible or impossible. Elena considered the data they had been collecting for 20 years. Consciousness abilities in humans were not just growing stronger. They were emerging earlier in each generation. Children born in the last decade showed natural consciousness manipulation abilities that previous generations had to learn through extensive training. We're witnessing accelerated human evolution, she said finally. Exposure to Weaver knowledge and consciousness development techniques is literally changing our species at the genetic level. The question is, Dr. Tanaka said, what do we do about it? Do we slow down the programs to match the original timeline? Or do we accept that humanity is evolving faster than expected? Elena thought about the patient figures of the Weavers in their crystal chamber and the message they had left about timing and preparation. But she also thought about the joy and natural grace she had seen in the children's faces during their transcendent contact. We let it happen naturally, she decided. The Weavers emphasized that consciousness evolution can't be forced, but they also said it shouldn't be suppressed. If human consciousness is ready to develop faster than originally projected, then perhaps that's exactly what should happen. Dr. Okafor looked concerned. But what about the global implications? If children can access transcendent consciousness, it will change everything about how we structure society, education, even family relationships. Then, we adapt, Elena said. We've been preparing for humanity's eventual transcendence for 20 years. If that future is arriving sooner than expected, we accelerate our preparations rather than trying to slow down natural development. The decision was made to expand the youth consciousness programs while carefully monitoring the children's psychological and social development. Elena found herself at the center of humanity's most rapid period of evolution, watching her species transform in ways that even the optimistic projections had never imagined. Within 5 years, children around the world were routinely making contact with transcended consciousness. Teenagers were developing consciousness manipulation abilities that surpassed those of trained adults. Universities began offering degree programs designed specifically for consciousness-enhanced students who could learn entire subjects by direct mental interface with information fields. The social changes were equally dramatic. Traditional hierarchies based on physical strength or accumulated wealth became irrelevant as consciousness development emerged as the true measure of human potential. Governments restructured themselves around principles of collective decision-making that incorporated input from transcended consciousness advisors. Art and music evolved to include dimensions that could only be perceived through consciousness expansion. Scientists made breakthrough discoveries by collaborating directly with transcended researchers who existed in the quantum consciousness field. Engineers designed technologies that responded to thought as naturally as they responded to physical manipulation. Elena watched it all with a mixture of pride and wonder. Humanity was becoming something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that achieved transcendence gradually, collectively, while maintaining their connection to physical existence. Rather than abandoning their biological forms like the Weavers, humans were learning to exist simultaneously in both physical and transcendent states. On the 40th anniversary of first contact with the Weavers, Elena stood again in the chamber where she had first witnessed transcendent consciousness. But, this time, she was not alone with alien teachers. The chamber was filled with humans who existed as both physical and transcendent beings, their consciousness spanning dimensions that their ancestors could never have imagined. The transcended Weavers were there too, their presence warm and welcoming in the consciousness field. But they were no longer humanity's teachers. They had become colleagues, fellow members of a galactic community that was richer and more diverse because of humanity's unique evolutionary path. "We did it," Elena said to the assembled consciousness, addressing both the humans and the weavers who shared the transcendent space. "We found our own way to transcendence without losing what made us human." The response came not in words but in a wave of joy and approval that echoed through the consciousness field. Humanity had not only survived their encounter with the great evolutionary filter, they had transformed it into an opportunity for unprecedented growth. Children played in gardens where flowers sang with consciousness-enhanced beauty. Artists created works that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Scientists explored the universe through direct consciousness projection while maintaining laboratories where physical research continued. Families shared thoughts and emotions directly while still cherishing the unique perspectives that made each individual precious. Elena looked up through the chamber's transparent ceiling at the stars beyond Earth's atmosphere. Somewhere among those stars, other species were approaching their own transcendence decisions. And when they were ready, they would find not just the patient weavers waiting to teach them, but humanity as well, a species that had learned to bridge the gap between transcendent consciousness and physical existence. The age of human transcendence had arrived not as an ending, but as a new beginning. And in the gardens where children learned to touch the light thoughts, the future of consciousness itself was being written by small hands guided by infinite wisdom. Elena smiled, remembering the day she had first set foot on an alien world and discovered that humanity was not alone in the universe. She had been right. They were part of something larger than themselves. But what she hadn't realized then was that humanity would not just join that larger community. They would help it evolve into something even greater than it had been before.